welcome to That Eurovision Podcast, Eurovision with a Slice of Life. My name is Angus, and I will be your host for today, and strap in for what's probably going to be a chaotic and long episode. I'm joined today by...
Okay. Yeah. Hi guys. It's Helen. I'm really excited to be here. Really excited to talk about this week's subject. Really excited because the Euros just ended. You guys can figure that out. What that means for me. But anyways, yeah, I'm super excited to be here and to have a fun time chatting with you guys.
And it's Isabelle here. I'm so happy that we're back. We've obviously had a bit of a break post ESC season, and we've got the Netherlands episode Dream Team back in the house, which I love. I love that that's how we're kicking off this new spate of podcast episodes. I'm just so excited about this episode, and a little nervous. You're going to hear I feel like there are going to be some controversial opinions. I mean, from me, certainly. I've had a time. I feel like we've all had a time, haven't we? But I've had a time. I've been through it. I am just on the tail end of recovering from COVID, which I definitely contracted from the Hattari gig in London a couple of weeks ago. So highs and lows over here in this household. And I'm just delighted to be here to talk about some Eurovision things.
Excellent. Well, clearly, as I already warned, it is going to be chaotic. We're off to an absolutely great start. And what is our topic for today? It's the 1980 Eurovision Song Contest. It's the last time it wasn't hosted by the winner. It's Morocco's debut. It's the start of Eurovision's long-running love affair with Johnny Logan. And so much more. There's a lot to discuss. Some quick context, we need to do the Wikipedia reading at the beginning of the episode. The 1980 Eurovision Song Contest was the 25th edition, so an anniversary. It was hosted by the Netherlands in Den Haag, The Hague, by the NOS after Israel, who won both 78 and 79, declined to host it for a second time in a row. So yeah, we had Morocco's debut, 19 countries participated. In the end, Johnny Logan won for the first time in his career with What's Another Year on 143 points. There were no 0 points, that's also always worth mentioning, but I think that's pretty much all the context we need. So there are plenty of interesting angles to approach this contest from. I think the one we will start off with is the one we always do, which is, what are your favorites? Please pick around 3 or 5 songs. Make it as long as or short as you want.
All right. I mean, we have to talk about Papa Penguin. It is one of the most delightful Eurovision songs, stagings I've ever seen. They are dressed in what looks like pink and blue spacesuits. We have backing singers who are dressed in tuxedos, and we also have a backing singer slash dancer slash person wandering around the stage in a penguin suit. And when I wrote up this edition of Eurovision for Eurovision Again, when it aired last year, I, of course, absolutely had to make them the feature image. Because what's not to love, truly? It's just very lovely. The man is even waddling around like a penguin. It's just delightful. In terms of other entries, who did I highlight? I want to talk about Norway in particular. Such a wonderful song. I'm going to try to pronounce. I'm probably going to be absolutely terrible at it. Sverre Kjelsberg and Mattis Heita and their song. I'm not going to insult the Norwegian people by trying to pronounce the song, but it is one of, I think, the first instances of a song in the Sami language and instances of Sami culture represented at Eurovision. Yep, it was not the first instance, but I'm glad they brought it back. And it's just such a lovely display, it's one of those entries this year that really moved me. Not necessarily a favorite, but I have to highlight it, is the United Kingdom's entry, because I feel like it's just kind of peak United Kingdom in the 70s and 80s. We have our group of 6, we have 3 men and 3 women, and we just have a cheesy song that's trying to go for something akin to ABBA, and I feel like this is like the B version of Bucks Fizz, who went on to win a year later. So they were formulating their plot, if you will, to their path to winning. I also have to mention Finland's entry purely because they have a flute. I also play the flute. I am partial to it. In fact, I have my flute next to me. I brought it with me to the UK. But absolutely did not deserve last place, and very glad that the Eurovision fans during Eurovision again did a little reassessment on that one. So those are the ones I'd like to highlight.
All right, let's get into this. I feel like I need to preface my picks by just like reminding of anybody who is a regular listener and letting you know, if you don't know me, I'm French Persian. So the music of West Asia and North Africa are deeply familiar to me. The reason I'm saying this is because I had to learn the hard way that that's not the case for a lot of people in Western Europe, you know, a lot of people in the world, to be honest. And in fact, a lot of Eurovision viewers of the time, I imagine, would have found the music of West Asia and North Africa quite alien and alienating. I mean, people who I grew up with felt that way when I played them really quite standard Egyptian pop, right? From like, yeah, some like very well-known singers. Like I learned that this was not something that a lot, you know, necessarily everybody just like has a natural affinity to. So and the reason I say this is because it colors my taste. It really has it influences the way that I consume Eurovision. It always has done. I'm constantly like kind of craving and on the lookout for anything that, you know, is influenced by West Asian music and North African music, and we hear lots of it now that the contest has expanded east, you know, but we didn't back in the 80s. And previous to that. And this year, 1980, we've got two really strong, in my opinion, and certainly strongly West Asian and North African pieces. And they're among my favorites. And they were paid dust. So we have to talk about Samira Ben Said, which is how she was known then. She's now, and for most of her career, has been known as Samira Said. So forgive me if I refer to her as Samira Said. That is her recording artist name. Ben Said is just a patronymic, I believe. Please, if you're an Arabic speaker and I'm getting this wrong, then at us and correct me. But I think it just means like daughter of Said, right? So yeah, Samira Said obviously gave Morocco their debut. We'll talk about that in more depth later. Her song was Bittakat Hub, and it's not my favorite thing she's ever done by any means, but it is really good in my opinion. Her voice is gorgeous. It's among my favorite voices on the earth. And this is like early in her career, right? So I don't actually know how well established she was in North Africa at the time. I know she went on to become one of the most well-known North African singers of all time. What her status was back then, I'm not sure. Was she an emerging artist, or was she kind of already, did she already have like a strong you know, pop presence? I'm not 100% certain. I know this wasn't her first appearance on a stage, right? Like she'd released plenty of music. It's sentimental disco, which I don't love the lyrics. They're a bit love, love, peace, peace. Like they're kind of nothing to me, right? Bitaka Teb means love card or love postcard. It's like, it's very much like, we want peace and we're, you know, all just the same and all we want is peace. Like I say, nothing to me. But the instrumentation is so clever because it's very much a meld of this traditional North African pop and the kind of disco that, this is a thing that I really noticed when going back to 1980 actually. Like there's so much disco influence. It's like almost the main kind of commercial pop influence, right? Is disco. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good song. I think it also is a grower. Like it, if you've only ever listened to it once or twice, give it a couple more listens. I entreat you to give it a chance because I think it was a really good, well-aimed entry from Morocco, and I do really enjoy the song. And Samira Said deserved better. along similar lines, Ajdapekan for Turkey with Petrol is one of my favorites in 1980. This one's bonkers. It's the official line is that it's about a man. So it's a love song. It is a love song. You know, it's addressed to a sort of an elusive lover, purportedly. The official line is that it's about a man called Petrol, Peter Oil. And if you look up the lyrics online, you will not find a consistent transliteration. Is she addressing petrol throughout, or is she addressing petrol? It's literally unclear, and it's unclear from listening to it as well. I thought, like, obviously about petrol, like there's literally a line in the middle of it that's like, you only understand dollars and marks. We're talking about commodities, yeah, and not romance. It's quite clear. But why? I have no fucking clue. I would love to have just been in the room where they were like, yeah, this is what we'll field for Eurovision. This will go down well. It's baffling to me. I don't understand why or what is happening, but musically it's fantastic. It's so good. Her voice is gorgeous. The instrumentation is flawless. I just love it so much. I think it's so good. And yeah, it just upsets me. It upsets me. I'm laughing at myself because I'm like about to go on a bit of a rant, but I'll keep it short. Basically, I know that at the time it was just juries, and now we've got televotes. So I'm kind of entreating televoters of the future to think about what it means when you vote for a song, because it's not just about what wins that year. It colors and impact what then that country will send and what other countries will send forever on, you know, after. And I don't mean to suggest that Turkey never sent another, you know, Eastern leaning song. That's not true at all. It literally won with, I think, a very bad song in the early noughts. It's literally one of the worst songs I've ever heard, but it is very much leaning into, you know, Eastern instrumentation and all of that. But I'm not even going to name it because you know, it's so blacklisted in this house. The song that Turkey eventually won with. So I'm not saying that, you know, this Petrol coming 15th ruined Turkey's chances with like very distinctly West Asian songs forever. Not at all. Actually, Turkey was fantastic at bringing elements of West Asian instrumentation into otherwise quite commercial, quite poppy songs. But what we do see, like the year after, is Turkey bringing something that's just pure Western pop. And to me, it's less good. To me, it's less interesting. And to me, it's clear that that's a direct result of both Turkey and Morocco ranking so poorly with the juries in 1980. It takes a little while before we hear something really Eastern again. Eastern, you know, by comparison to Europe. I mean West Asian really and North African. So rant over. Let's move on. I have to shout out Spain. Trio Limpio, Quédate esta noche, I think is just pure class. I just, there's not much to say about it other than I think it deserved better than 12th place, and I think it was a really classy moment for Spain, who, you know, were in their struggle era by this point. I also want to echo Helen's comments about Norway's song Svari Kjelsberg and Mattisetta with Sami Adnan. I think actually it's worth briefly just touching on the context of that song, because yes, it was, as far as I'm aware, the first Salmi representation at Eurovision, the first instance of yoik at Eurovision, which is obviously the traditional music of Salmi. But more than that, it is actually very, very like socio-politically rooted. It's a protest song. I mean, and it's also literally a song about a protest. So just to briefly read the Wikipedia entry kind of background about this, Sami Adnan was inspired by the autonomy movement among the Sami people of northern Norway, with the duo singing that the demand for autonomy was made in a very subdued manner. The actual lyric is, could a request be more softly made, right? Be more gently made. Mention is also made of the traditional music of the region, the yoik, which is described as being stronger than gunpowder in the lyrics. And it refers explicitly to a hunger strike by Sami activists in front of the Norwegian Parliament building in October 1979, in connection with the Alta controversy, where Mattis Heita first performed the yoik that constituted the song's chorus. So when the lyrics refer to Sameland, Selp-me, coming like a gust of wind from the north, and the way that they stage it, super simple, but Mattis literally comes in like a little gust of wind from the north, enters the stage. You think it's just a solo performance, and then there he comes, gently yoiking. And the way that their voices then combine and then sing about the endurance of yoik and really explicitly place it in the context of protest. It's dreamy and it's musically really beautiful to me. Like, I think that, as Helen said, even if it's not musically your thing, you kind of have to give it a moment, you know, and you have to give it consideration, because it's an important moment sociopolitically and also within ESC. But to me, musically, it's so pretty. It's so pretty. 16th place. This isn't my winner, but it's my top couple, right? My winner is Belgium. Yes! Okay, Telex Eurovision is obviously iconic. I'm laughing because Angus and Helen are doing the dance and like mouthing the lyrics. It's obviously iconic. We all saw clips of it long before we like watched the whole performance, I'm sure. But here's the thing, it's the first, I mean, according to the spokesperson, and who I assume is speaking truth, it's the first instance of a song at Eurovision composed solely using electronic sounds other than the voices. So I'm sure it's not the first instance of electronic. I imagine it's not the first instance of electronica. I mean, the history of electronic music is kind of fascinating, and do a deep dive, because it starts off very, very experimental, with like found sounds and collages and theremins and all of that business from like the 1920s through the 1940s and 50s. By 1980, we're starting to see, it's been a few years now, and we're starting to see electronic music emerging from the experimental pop, the experimental arts sort of environment, and really like infiltrating pop music in a bigger way. Like there are electronic elements in pop music from the 60s, possibly even earlier than that, but in terms of electronica being like the main feature of a pop artist sound, that really only happens in like the mid 70s. I grew up listening to Jean-Michel Jarre, and who's a seminal, super important, super iconic electronic music artist. And his Oxygène, which was just a kind of an amazing moment within music and within electronica, was released in 1976. Equinox, the kind of companion piece, was 1976, I believe. 1978, sorry. So 76 and 78. And so to me, there's a lot going on when I hear Telex and Eurovision. There's a lot of the joy of early electronica in it, right? Like, the performance is obviously dry. It's very dryly humorous, but it is very humorous. It's very playful. The little kind of choreography is just, it's very coolly done, right? And so you can see that they're poking fun, but to me, there's a lot of joy and a lot of affection in the way that they're poking a little bit of fun at the contest. And it's ambiance. The fucking confetti. He just pulls out the confetti, and just the little confetti moments, and then at the very end, the little disposable camera. It's so charming. I love it so much. And then the Te Deum that they play on the electronic instruments to finish the song up. Again, like this is poking fun, but it's so affectionate. And to me, it's just a really pleasing moment. I often feel quite alienated by music from older eras. There's a lot that I love, but there's much more that I find very alienating. I mean, again, I'm really speaking about Western European music. A lot of early Eurovision alienates me deeply. A lot of what did really well in 1980 alienates me really deeply. and and so there's just something incredibly refreshing that this closing song doesn't use the orchestra, which quite frankly I think is overrated, right? I'm so sorry, I'm going to make enemies, but fuck the orchestra. And is just sort of pointing forward, you know? Electronica doesn't always do well at Eurovision. In fact, it often does badly, even now. It's obviously an important element in a lot of Eurovision songs, right? It's like the stuff that's still very deeply electronica heavy doesn't always do very well. Mostly doesn't do very well. But it's impossible to imagine the contest without electronica now. And so for me, Eurovision is a really important moment. I think I've rambled for quite enough time about my those are my top 5 picks.
Okay, yeah, a lot of good choices already. I'm going to give you 4 songs because for my 5th I couldn't choose, because on the one hand I want to pick the pure unadulterated but perfectly executed schmaltz of Johnny Logan, but I also don't want to be an uncultured, like, basic B word and be like, skip Morocco, which is also truly amazing. And there's some others that I would then forget about, like Portugal, for example, which I really like. But let's just jump into my 4th place. It's already been discussed extensively. It's Eurovision by Telex. It just sits between, like, it's sort of the missing link between, like, Kraftwerk and Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles. It's just because it does have like the jokey vibe that fits more with the latter at the same time. Yeah, no, it's very much also, it's your 3 uncles performing on stage at a wedding, which again we have to love. It definitely feels like it comes from a place of affection. Like, it's definitely a jokey song about the contest, but definitely feels like it comes from people who at least like parts of the contest a lot, which also helps it be as good as it is. Now, in 3rd place is Norway. I mean, we've already said everything about it. I don't think there's much more to add. Any historical context or anything that I want to add, Isabelle has already thankfully done for me. So we can move on and go to my 2nd place. This was in my ESC 250 top 10. It's now moved down a bit because I decided to switch some stuff around. But it is Amsterdam by Maggie McNeil. This is for me, so I have like this weird history with the kind of music I grew up with, but this is so this is very much old Dutch pop music. This is still like when, like, the Dutch pop music that's, if you translate this to French directly, it could be a chanson. Like, it straight up, you don't, okay, maybe you change out the street organ for a different instrument, but as such, nothing has to change. It could be a French chanson. Mag McNeil delivers it just marvelously. Her voice is amazing. The build up of the song is just so good. Like, that towards the end, that is genuinely just so well composed, and I just love that so much. But my number one, for so many different reasons, is Theater from Katja Epstein. And Katja Epstein, I need to make it, is absolutely like a massive name and star in Germany. As in, like, she, people forget she competed in Eurovision even with this song because just the song itself was so big. Katja Epstein is just this massive name. The lyrics are actually like very interesting. It, even though it's not a joke entry, obviously, like, it does sort of sit in that same area as Eurovision, where it's very much a meta song about. Now, the staging is absolutely atrocious. I do like, it's about theater. I don't know why we need the weird mimes. Like, I'm not averse to mimes or clowns, but I don't get why we need them here. That does feel like a fortunate choice, although, it still did well in the contest. It finished 2nd. Well deserved, definitely. But something just about the sound, just like, I just love the sound of it so much. And lyrics are pretty good as well, so there's just nothing negative to say about it, for me at least. And it just sits on that sweet spot of, is it Schlager? Sure. But it doesn't feel like Schlager, which does make it then work for me. So, yeah, I will just quickly throw it to you two if you do have anything to say before we move on.
I'm just gonna, can we record this moment for posterity? Angus liking Schlager? The unthinkable has occurred. I feel like every single podcast episode has like at least a 10-minute rant from you about how much you despise Schlager. So I'm just I'm just really holding this moment, framing it for the That Eurovision podcast wall.
In terms of other entries of note, this is the first appearance of Anna Vissi for Greece. She represented Cyprus later in the decade and also came back in 2006 when Greece hosted. And then also noting that, to kind of add on to theater, Katja Epstein is one of the most successful Eurovision artists. She participated 3 times and made the top three times. So, I mean, I think officially she is the most successful Eurovision artist who didn't win the contest. So, like, it's no small feat there.
I mean, sure, Johnny Logan won twice, but only twice, not 3 times. So not while performing. Yes, he did write that one song.
1991 does not count as much as he wants to make you think it does.
No, because in that case we also genuinely need to call Stefan Raab Eurovision royalty, and I don't think the people are ready for that conversation.
You're right. I'm not ready for that conversation. On the subject of Johnny Logan, I begrudgingly have grown to enjoy him. I say begrudgingly because it's so not my cup of tea. That music style is not my cup of tea. It sort of embodies one of the elements of what I was talking about, Western European music that from bygone eras that kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. But sometimes it is well done, or it's charismatically done. In the UK in 1980 is a great example of a song that Helen's like, oh, you're coming for my fave. No, is a great example of a song that on paper I absolutely I have no time for. It's just not my thing. And it's a taste thing. It's just not my thing at all. It's so heterosexual. I just can't. And I know that I'm in the company. We're all bisexuals in this little episode here. But there's something so there's something so compet about that kind of music, that specific song, the staging. But I
have to quickly interject. Johnny Logan does look like the twink during his performance. We cannot deny that.
I don't know. I'll come back to him in a sec, but just to kind of wrap up my thought about the UK in 1980. It's so on paper, so not my cup of tea, but it is so charismatically performed. I fucking hate the staging, but they really sell it. They're very charming to watch, you know? So I'm there going, oh God, this is so straight. I can't handle it. But it's actually very charming, and I don't hate it. And on paper, I would normally hate it, is what I'm saying. Not just because it's straight, but also because that musical style, that sort of sentimental kind of sort of classic 60s pop style is just, oh my God, it's my nightmare, really. It's one of my many nightmares. And Johnny Logan's kind of got that croony thing going on, hasn't he? But again, he's a watchable performer. He's got a lovely voice. Doesn't he? And so even if the songs, they're good songs. I'm talking about him generally. I know that, obviously he was new to the competition at this point. But the same could be said for his second winning song too. They're good songs, man. They're just, they work. They're very melodically pretty. I can't really I can't maintain my hate boner for him or them, or the people who are Ireland stans, or Rory, I'm so sorry. I'm hiding behind my shield of I absolutely love the voice, and it's my one shield, against people who might accuse me of hating Ireland in Eurovision, which otherwise I pretty much do. But here's what I'm going to say for Johnny Logan: original sad lad with pipes. I think so. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe original sad twink, but I think OG sad lad is going to be my enduring label for him. He's giving sad lad.
That performance in the UK's in particular give what I call Lawrence Welk vibes. I don't know if we've ever watched old episodes. So there's this variety show in the US. It's going from like the 60s through the 80s, and it used to like run in reruns on PBS all the time. But it was like, it's what you think a variety show from the 60s and 70s and 80s would look like. Very much Eurovision, like with the long dresses and the big hair and the interesting suits. Very that. So that song in particular, I'm like, yeah. So if you've ever seen like the Dunice stuff from SNL, that's what it's parodying. But yeah, it was just like, oh, this is this reminds me of sitting at my grandparents' house watching Lawrence Welk and nothing else.
I think a lot of people are nostalgic for the. I mean, they literally make the joke in Love Love Peace Peace about, you know, the what's new, no, what seems new and fresh at Eurovision actually being about 20 years old and like the real music market. We see that again and again. I think it's fine. Like it's fine. So I think there's a lot to get nostalgic about at Eurovision. I think there always has been. There are always going to be things that kind of are a bit more on the pulse of what's fresh contemporarily, and then there's going to be a lot that's like playing on what's been popular and what's been popular therefore for like enduringly for like a decade or two. So hence, you know, we're in 1980 and we're like, we've got so much disco. I mean, and maybe this is not correct, but I think of disco as late 70s really being like peak disco era. But in fact, of course, it like endured through the 80s. And of course, Eurovision was full of disco through the early 80s particularly. It makes sense that it would be. I kind of want to pick up on something that I think you alluded to, Angus, where you and maybe not, maybe you were just talking about the song specifically, like this year is whimsical. Like you didn't, that's not your word, that's the word that I'm applying to it. But I think that when you were talking about Telex and you were talking about one of the other songs, I can't now remember which one, but there's whimsy, right? Like it's not that these are all novelty entries or anything like that, but there is novelty in quite a lot of the entries. There's sort of a gimmick in quite a lot of them. Like even something which, you know, I feel like has flown under the radar, Greece, right? Like that's whimsical. Even, I mean, Denmark, the way that song is staged is sort of, it just has charming whimsy. The fact that we've got a song called Theater, a song called Cinema, it's sort of like sentimental and nostalgic. And obviously Papa Pingouin is like the most whimsical of the lot, right? And I do love it. Like I have a lot of time for that song. It's like, it's so adorable. I mean, the lyrics about his wings being like the wings of I mean, I've never heard windmills being described as having wings, but that is literally what the lyric is. Like, your wings, like those of windmills, are useless. You know, so just like encouraging him to not, you know, not get his hopes up that he can fly across the world, but he'll fly anyway, and then he'll come back. Now he loves his little ice floe, and it's so cute. And they're like 16, right? The two girls singing they're babies. It's just it's very charming. Like it, but without being twee. I think that's the thing that's quite striking to me. So watching 1980, I was really struck by how much of it is charming without being twee. I think it's kind of its superpower, really. And I was curious to see if that came from, like, what that came from. But 1979 is not like that. And, like, the winner was not like that either, right? Hallelujah, which won in 1979, it's not whimsical. 79 is generally a lot more kind of ballady and feels a lot more safe. And then suddenly, just in 1980, there's like this outbreak of like sweet, charming whimsy and a lot more diversity. And I feel like that then continues on through the 80s. And I love to see it.
Yeah, it's interesting where that came from. There's definitely a lot of whimsy, just fun to be had with 1980, I think. And that was also, not just for us watching it now, but also back in the day. That does seem like it was a fun contest. With the disco thing, look, I know, at least in the USA, disco died, is often considered a rather violent death in 79 and 1980. But we shouldn't forget that, for example, in Europe, I mean, ABBA are a disco group, and they're this little known Eurovision band. They're almost forgotten in history, but they're in their original form. They continued making hits until 1982, and the reason they stopped wasn't because of lack of commercial success. It was just because if you make a band consisting of married couples, you will end up with the Fleetwood Mac problem, and you will have to break up at some point. It just doesn't seem to be able to be a lasting thing. But yeah, I mean, ABBA, like, especially like Super Trooper is from around the time. Super Trooper is super disco. Like, it cannot be put in any other way. So it's definitely like in Europe, disco seems to have lived on longer, and then immediately fed into like when you got like to the late 80s, where then it sort of got combined with like the rave music that was in UK into like the modern dance style stuff that you got into 90s, and it does seem to be converging in different ways that the USA just had to hobble along later. But I think we've talked about this enough. I mean, this from the length could already be a podcast episode, and we've only had one question. So moving on, this should be a short one. I think at least I know my answer will be short. And like, what did we think of the hosting and just how the Netherlands created this event?
It's definitely has a bit of a pared back feel to it. Obviously, this was a scenario in which the previous year's winning country did not host again, and much like this year, the process of figuring out where we're going took a bit longer. There were a lot of organizational things that had to happen. So basically, what the Netherlands did was reuse a lot of the stage from the last time they hosted. And if you do watch and compare clips from 1980 and 1976, there's a lot of similarities. It's not complete copy and paste. I think they're both distinct, but there's similarities. We didn't do postcards. At this contest, we had spokespersons from each country. Noel Edmonds was the one for the UK, and boy, did that age well. I'm not kidding. So basically, each entry was introduced with a little spiel by a spokesperson from the country in the country's language. The host hosted entirely in Dutch. We did not hear English or French except for when other people in the contest were speaking English or French, and of course when the points were coming in. Yeah, I think, so the Euro What podcast just did an episode about times where the previous year's winner couldn't host, and they said something about the budget, I think, for the contest being around, I want to say 2 million, I want to say. I haven't checked for what that is, like, adjusted for inflation. And obviously that's not it was a very different contest than it is now, just in general. But there's definitely something to be said about, I wouldn't say this is, for the cost of what it cost to put on this event, it doesn't look cheap. I think they did a really good job with the budget that they had. And I think the entries that we had certainly did a wonderful job in putting on a great show, which certainly helps. I think if we had kind of a slate of a little bit more dull conventional entries, I feel like this contest might be looked upon a bit differently. But I think they ran it pretty succinctly. I don't think we had many technical issues. Maybe, I can't remember if there was anything with the voting. But yeah, I think just overall as a production, it was an enjoyable watch.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I particularly agree that the show was really made by the entries, and yeah, I think you're right, Helen, that the fact that we had these kind of quite a lot of uplifting and sort of, pleasing, jaunty entries really detracted from any kind of boredom that one might feel at a more pared back production. Maybe this is controversial, maybe not. Like, I feel like, I am in the presence of at least one fellow Sanremo detractor in Angus. I'm remembering correctly, aren't I? You're like loathing of Italian men singing extends to Sanremo, right? Sorry, I'm speaking quite strong terms. Angus is sort of like, nodding half.
Italian men should be seen and not heard.
I mean, I can't agree, but I will say that in 1980, That Italian Man should have been seen and not heard. I think Italy 1980 is the worst song in the contest. And I mean, it did fantastically well. And I think it is appalling. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I just can't pass up an opportunity to slate a man singing a song unpleasantly to my ears. I really, really don't like it. Looks great. I mean, what a delectable palette of sherbet, pastel sherbet ice cream colours and beautiful costuming. Just wish it had been a different song. Why am I talking about this? Because, oh yes, the hosting! Let's come back to the question. I really enjoy a pared back production, actually. Like, I was thinking about this, I could do without all of the interval act. I mean, I know there was an interval act. It's fine. I think it dragged on a little bit, personally. Sorry if there are any percussionists out there, but I think it did drag on a bit. I like a show that just gets on with it. Like, I don't need, sorry Sanremo stans, sorry anybody who thought the hosting at this year's Eurovision was just like the pinnacle of excellence. I'm not a big fan of like a lot of bits and sketches, and like they're usually not very good, or it's just difficult, isn't it? Because you've got viewers from all over this huge region, and all of our sensibilities are different, and our, cultural frames of reference are different. And so you end up with this kind of lowest common denominator sort of approach. And what that kind of yields is sketches that are often just not very funny or not very good, or like just kind of a little bit falling back on tropes and stereotypes that we could do without. Like, I'm now also really thinking about the postcards at Eurovision 1979, Israel's postcards, which I love a bit of mime. I actually don't agree with you, Angus. I think that Germany's staging in 1980 is delightful. Love a bit of mime, love a bit of, clownery. But I bloody hated the Israel 79, the Jerusalem 79 postcards, because they're just falling back on, tropes and cliches that are like kind of uncomfortable, really. So all of this to say that I thought that the Netherlands, obviously by stepping up to the plate, naturally delivering a Eurovision Song Contest, with Israel kind of bankrupt and not able to, great that they did it at all. We'd have taken it in any form. I think that the form that we got it in, which was a kind of a tight and streamlined show, really, was not a bad thing, not even in the slightest. Like, I didn't even miss the postcards. I didn't even bloody miss them. And we're in the modern day, we're so used to the postcards. Like, they weren't a given back in the day, and there wasn't like a given format. They didn't always feature the artists. They certainly weren't they were kind of still quite new, right, back in 1980. So I'm sure that the audience back then didn't miss them at all. But I didn't even miss them now as a viewer in 2022. I love the spokespeople. Bring the spokespeople back. Love a little intro and I mean, lovely to hear, just obviously in the songs as well, to hear we still had the languages rule back then, so lovely to hear so many different languages. It's just so nice. I'm biased. I'm a linguist. I love hearing different languages anyway. Lovely to hear that in the songs, but also just lovely to hear that in the spokespeople. Just, yeah. And I assume I watched a version without commentary because I'm so sorry. I'm just, making enemies left, right, and centre here, I think. But fuck Terry Wogan. I'm so sorry. I hate his commentary. It upsets me greatly. He just can't but be misogynistic and xenophobic, and it just makes me unhappy. So I'm always delighted to get to be able to view without commentary. Obviously, the downside to that is that I didn't understand half of what the host was saying because it's all in Dutch, as Helen said, and various spokesperson introductions I didn't understand either, because obviously many languages I don't speak or understand there. But it's all right. You can kind of get the gist anyway. We've got the capacity to look up the lyrics now, so I did appreciate that, what each of the spokespeople were doing was giving a little intro to the song. And obviously our commentators do that now, don't they? It's like we rely on, well, Graham Norton for the BBC or whoever it is, wherever you are, we rely on the person giving the television commentary, the broadcast commentary, to introduce the song. But as evidenced by Graham Norton of the BBC, they don't do a good job. Like, it seems like they haven't done their research, or no one's even done the research for them. Like, so often I'll hear like the commentary that introduces a song, and it'll miss all of the essential points, or it won't even bother trying to give you any background or any. I mean, there's something that actually Terry Wogan did used to do quite well, was he'd give you a little like translation of some of the main lyrics, the chorus or the first lyrics or whatever, which, okay, I have to give it to him, that is quite a useful thing to have. But yeah, with spokespeople introducing their own country song, they obviously are perfectly positioned to give the correct, most concise, most clear background for the song and the artists. And then, the commentator, I'm thinking about this, how this would translate now. You'd imagine that the commentator would have essentially a translation of what they were saying in front of them and would be able to relay the same info. Can we do that? Can we bring that back? Ditch the postcards, just have that? I'd be up for it, personally.
Combine with the postcard, instead of just the random music that plays over it, just have the bit of narration. Also, important to shout out, we did hear Irish on the stage because of this as well. Like, that is not something we really hear on the Eurovision stage unless you watch Junior Eurovision. And we got Irish. Like, that is a pretty big deal, honestly. And I also find it interesting that, I mean, the Netherlands was the country that introduced us to postcards in the first place in 1970, because the show had to be padded out because everyone dropped out because we had the 4 winners and everyone was mad. And they were then also like, you know what, we can change this up. Definitely not for budget reasons. What do you mean it's expensive to send cameras out across the country? How dare you? Also, quick shout out, because I forgot to mention it, our solo host was Marloes Fluitsma, well-known Dutch actress. I must admit, I don't think I've seen anything that she was in besides hosting Eurovision. I mean, I might have watched some, but it's from a while back, and that's not really Dutch movies and TV I've seen much of, like not of the 60s, 70s, 80s stuff. Honestly, her main claim to fame to me, and it's terrible to say, is that she was married to Herman van Veen, who is like a legendary Dutch just artist in general, like theater and musical artist. No, yeah, some people might know him in Germany, especially. He's also very big in Netherlands, some other countries.
Thank you for saying. I was waiting for you to shout her out and say her name, because Marloes Fluitsma. Thank you.
Exactly.
I don't want to try, and I don't want to. I know that we've literally got a Dutch speaker here. Like, let's just let Angus do that. But I thought she did a beautiful job. Just very unintrusive, super professional. Just did it. She just did the thing.
Definitely, and I think also worth saying is I mean, of course, we couldn't understand them necessarily all that, but all the spokespeople seem to be that introduced the songs also did, at the very least, a professional job. Like, there's no one that I'm like, oh, what are you doing on the stage? Because that can happen at time. Again, I'm reminded of one of the podcast episodes that I did. That was 1991. But yeah, so
what a time!
What a time that was. No, this was just a very.
R.I.P. to all of you who had to watch that for the episode.
Was a very professionally hosted and organized contest, especially considering everything that happened in the run up to it. Shall I quickly get into that now? Then, are you two alright with that? All right, so I'm going to quickly shout someone out. They are Mr. JDS, that is on Twitter. That you can follow them with their Mr. JDS World. So that is MRJDS World over on Twitter. They tweet a lot about Eurovision, specifically about the history of the contest and about the organization of the contest, specifically by going into newspaper archives. For all those contests that were like before the internet era, where we don't have all the stuff floating about, because we get so much information out, so many people asking questions and being able to ask other people and being then able to spread that on Twitter. And we get all those rumors, and every little like local city council in the UK that wants to or doesn't want to host Eurovision can now just send that in a press release out. Everyone knows it. Whereas back in the day, if you didn't have the local newspaper, you were out of luck. You wouldn't know about it. But yeah, especially like he also highlighted this because this is like this year we get in 2023 we're getting a Eurovision Song Contest again, not hosted by last year's winner, and last time we had that was 1980, and there was this whole build up to it that directly after 1979 contest. So Israel had just won again in its own country. They were like, yeah, we don't think we can do this. We'll give it a go. And like there were different like ways of phrasing it, but there were some attempts, but it was very unlikely, especially an open air venue was proposed, and the EBU even back in the day was like, we're not doing Eurovision open air. That's not a thing we do. This is not a festival. This is a contest. So it's unclear how serious Israel was about hosting or not. Moving on, there was a lot of rumors about, Spain is going to host it, or Monaco, out of all countries, is going to host it. Or like the UK apparently was maybe offered something. Germany was in the mix. Like anyone you can imagine that would definitely be at Eurovision anyway was in the mix. Actually, funny to say that considering Monaco dropped out this year, but they allegedly were considered. But yeah, back in August '79, the IBA, so the Israeli Broadcast Association, was like, yeah, we cannot host it. All the money we have, we need for introducing color television, because that is also very expensive. It's something that has to be done. That it is like that's also a political issue that is on a time frame. We cannot get out of it. All right.
Didn't Israel literally have to borrow like other countries' equipment because they won twice in a row, obviously, right? They won in 78 and 79, and they did host it in 79. But like in order to host it in 79, they had to borrow equipment from like other broadcasters from other countries because they color broadcasts weren't a thing for them yet. I mean, they were broadcasting in color occasionally for very special occasions, but broadly weren't. So like it had already been a logistical nightmare for them to do it in 79.
Exactly. If you then want to introduce color television in general, so you need to replace all your cameras, you maybe need to train your cameramen in certain aspects. It's also just in the back end. There's so much stuff going on. Yeah, so Israel couldn't. At that point, Israel was still supposed to compete. Now, there was some stuff going on about the exact date that the contest would be held on, and it was first supposed to be 1 week later than it ended up happening. So instead of the 19th of April, it was supposed to be the 26th of April. Anyway, lots of back and forth between countries. Apparently, Dutch broadcasting system is very complicated, so we'll have to split up between the NOS and the TOS. The TOS is an entertainment-focused one that would have organized the Dutch national final, had there been that one that year, which is also a drama unto itself. And the NOS, which is the news one. NOS and the successor of TOS, Afro TOS, organized and hosted the 2021 contest. So they still do it. Like they've never stopped doing that. They still do Eurovision. But basically what ended up happening is that NOS ended up hosting the contest in something that made the TOS angry. But it was like, okay, if we really have to host a contest, we can. I mean, we still have the same building available from a few years ago. Just move the week earlier. Why? I don't know. It's all special day in the Netherlands, the 26th of April, but we just want the week earlier. I'm sure there are reasons, or not. Maybe NOS was feeling petty on that day, also possible. And yeah, it just so after a lot of stuff where it could have been held anywhere, and the NOS really was like, well, we are not interested, to the point that in some newspapers it was even said there will not be a Eurovision in 1980. And then the NOS was like, fine, we'll do it. And that is how we got to this contest. But it did end up with an argument also between two Dutch broadcasters that then was like, how dare you? But it was, in the end, it was agreed. So it was in August that Israel officially said we cannot host, and it was in October that it then was officially announced that NOS would be hosting it and organizing it in Den Haag. Of note, as we said, Israel, I mean, we haven't mentioned that Israel wasn't there at all, which is the only time in Eurovision history that the winner didn't show up whatsoever in the contest. That is because the 19th of April was Israeli Liberation. It was a national holiday.
Remembrance Day.
Remembrance Day. Yeah, it was a national holiday, and actually, is, according to a number of Dutch newspapers, quoting now directly from Mr. JDS World, to allow Israel to compete on its Memorial Day, the EBU made some concessions, including what would have been the first live on tape broadcast. We could have had the live on tape broadcast back in 1980, because the point is, of course, no one from Israel's delegation could have been there. It was all expected that they are in Israel, or at least not working on that day. And so there was a lot of like looking into like all the requirements. So even the IBA didn't even need to broadcast Eurovision live. They could have broadcast it on 48-hour delay, which is also a big thing. But which of course raises questions like, how do you handle the voting? Like, because to be fair, I assume the jury still would have heard the songs the day before something to help voting, so that might have mitigated any issues.
But it changes the picture, doesn't it? It sort of adds a new bunch of unknowns into the... Yeah. Really interesting that they decided not to do that in the end. And I wonder whether that was like a kind of that was also kind of a sort of a kind of an ethical, social, religious kind of decision, or whether it was a logistical one. Did they think that, no, we don't want to risk it, we don't want to kind of get involved, it's too much faff? Or was it, well, that wouldn't really be in the spirit of, taking this day as a national holiday? Like, I wonder which it was. I really don't know.
This thread has the answer.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah. In the end, the Israeli public didn't agree with Israel competing, even if not live, on Memorial Day, because you still are competing on the day. So Israel withdrew. Again, this is all from newspapers, especially this specific from Dutch newspapers, so this could all be rumors. We do not know its veracity, but was reported in multiple newspapers, and it's all the info we have. Like, there is...
It's what we have to go on.
It's what we have, exactly. And if I could speak or read Hebrew, I maybe could have dug into some archives over there, but I cannot, and I already struggle enough with the 3 languages I can speak. Let's not add more problems to that. But yeah, and speaking of, and this will lead us into the next topic, there is a lot of this Eurovision myth going on, basically, about exactly how Morocco got into the contest, and only for 1 year. And that is that the story often goes, oh, Israel withdrew, and Morocco was like, all right, this is our shot, now we can go in, because obviously there was and there remains a lot of tension between Israel and the larger Arab world that it is, like, both bordered and not bordered by, like, just in general. There's a lot of tension.
Basically, any Muslim majority country, there's always going to be tensions and issues with, and we do see it again and again rear its head. So it's not like this rumor or myth has come from nowhere. There are countries who have expressed interest in participating in Eurovision since 1980 that are Muslim majority countries, but the sticking point, like with Lebanon, not being able to participate because actually it would not be able to broadcast the Israeli entrant, and of course that violates EBU rules. Other countries in the Gulf, for example, there's been interest in participation, but there's always a sticking point because Muslim majority countries are pro-Palestine. Okay, like and Israel is an apartheid state. It's an anti-Palestinian apartheid state, so it is always going to be a sticking point. I mean, Turkey has withdrawn from Eurovision before, because there's been, in fact, didn't it withdraw literally in 1981? Because, no, wait, that doesn't make sense. No, did it withdraw in... I'm so sorry. My facts are just fact soup in my brain. But did Turkey withdraw in 1979? One of the years that Israel hosted, Turkey withdrew because of there was pressure, just like socio-political pressure from within the country, against participating in a contest that was hosted in an anti-Palestinian country, right? Like, from Muslim majority country to do that it is just a fraught subject. So that there's tension. I'm just chucking this in there. But Angus, please continue, and forgive me for interrupting.
Especially, for example, the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt was only got effective in 1980. It was already signed in 1979. Big peace deal, massive deal, but only became effective in 1980, and then between Egypt and Israel, there was actually fairly fast sort of normalization of diplomacy, at least, but difficult. Let's not dive into those politics too much. But that doesn't seem to be the case, because it was already said back in. Sorry, I need to find the tweet now. Israel only withdrew in like fairly late from the contest, because Israel only withdrew by mid-December, whereas Morocco had already been announced as a competitor in November. So Morocco had already said we will be competing before it was officially announced that that Israel withdrew from the contest. So clearly, well, it may have been an issue, and of course it was always possible that Israel had maybe already said to the EBU to dropping out, but the announcement comes later, or that Morocco said there might have been dealings behind the back, there might have been information we're not privy to, but it does seem to be the case that it would have been okay otherwise, which of course would have potentially been very interesting, especially had Morocco perhaps done better. What could it have meant for the competition, considering a lot of the Northern African states that are on the Mediterranean are actually have broadcasts, so are EBU members. Tunisia and Algeria being two main examples of that. Tunisia also having had rumored interest in Eurovision, but never actually applying in the end, for also what Isabelle already said. But yeah,
To put the rumor to bed, officially, according to the reporting that we have access to, Morocco officially confirmed its participation in Eurovision 1980 before Israel officially withdrew from Eurovision 1980.
Exactly.
So we kind of have to go with, what we have, which is that in theory, until Israel officially confirmed its withdrawal, we had a Eurovision where we would have had actually a majority Muslim North African country, Arabic speaking, all of that business, competing, perhaps not happily, but competing, or agreeing to compete alongside Israel. It is interesting.
Yeah, and I do think that is just worth noting, because it is this rumor and also shows that things can change, that hopefully we maybe will have. I mean, especially Lebanon or Tunisia, like besides Morocco, because I grew actually up in a town with a fairly high percentage of Moroccan immigrants, so I am sort of familiar with that music. But after that, if I think of Arabic language music, I think of Tunisian, and then some music from Lebanon actually, which, I mean, that shows my own personal idiosyncrasies, but
yeah,
I would just love to hear more of that in the context.
I mean, I'm French. I'm French Persian, so I like a lot of Algerian music has made its way into French pop. There's a huge amount of fusion and crossover French Algerian music. So the cultural influence of North Africa, particularly, but also West Asia, Southwest Asia, on European music is huge, and we hear it in the contest. We hear it. I mean, part of why I love a lot of the Eastern European and Southeastern European Eurovision entries that I love is that they are very West Asian influenced and West Asian leaning. The borders between Europe and North Africa and also West Asia are not rigid. There's been cultural exchange for centuries. So it's, to be incredibly controversial, I would happily have yeah, surprise, surprise, it's a day that ends in a Y, and Isabelle's got some controversial things to say. I would happily see Israel ejected from the contest if it meant that we could have a dozen bloody North African and West Asian countries in the contest, actually. And I mean, we enter sticky territory here, because what is required for a country to be ejected from the contest? I mean, and we kind of covered this, I think, in a live that we did around just shortly after Eurovision this year. But why is it that Russia gets ejected from the contest when it violates human rights in Ukraine, but Israel doesn't get ejected from the contest when it violates human rights in Palestine? Like, what's going on there? And I mean, there are many answers, and we're not going to get into that now. That's not what we're here for. But let's just put that question out into the ether, because it's something that I'm constantly thinking about as a person who is both European and West Asian, right? And from a Muslim majority country in West Asia. So it's just, it's very sticky, right? I know that it's complex, but I think it's really worth thinking about.
I
So
think.
yeah, Helen, what do you think? Just your thought also about Morocco's debut. Just
Yeah.
go wild.
I quite enjoyed it. I think it was so different, I think, from every other entry, that it was just like a nice breath of fresh air. I wish we had gotten to see more of them. Perhaps if they had done better, the broadcaster would have wanted to continue. But I will point out that when this was broadcast for Eurovision again, we of course had the Eurovision fan vote, and of course a lot of results changed, and one of those is that the fans in August 2021 actually voted Morocco's entry as their third favorite. So I think it's interesting to see, like, this is again in the era where there were only juries. You could only imagine what perhaps a public vote would have thought of this. So I think there is some desire to see Morocco back in the contest. There's a desire to see many countries that have since left the contest come back. I think the more the merrier, and I'm absolutely for that. But specifically for Morocco to come back, I think that would be a very big deal. I mean, maybe in 1980 it would have been a stretch to have a North African nation competing with primarily Western European acts, with a couple of exceptions. But now we're in an era where we have most of Eastern Europe competing, and a few countries who geographically might, according to some standards, might not technically be in Europe, Australia notwithstanding. So, I mean, if we can have Australia in the contest, I think we can have Morocco back. I would love to see them back.
I'd love to see countries like Malta, drawing on their roots and their ties to North African and West Asian culture. Like, we're talking about a country whose language is like heavily influenced by Arabic, and we never see that. We don't see Maltese in the contest. And we see very little that really kind of shows Malta's anything other than like a very Western European commercial, cultural kind of thing. It depresses me a little bit, and I'm not surprised in a sense, because we still exist in a kind of a cultural landscape where most countries look to Anglophone, media, including music. So I don't know. There's something kind of a bit bittersweet about watching a contest where every country is singing in one of its native. Like, I don't think the language rule should be brought back. I know me and Rosie have like talked about this before. I think that it's really important that there's a kind of the flexibility for an artist to sing in whatever language or languages they choose, be they invented, be they their own languages, be they minority languages. So it was huge thing that's opened up since the language rule was ditched, is that minority languages can now compete. It's just, hearing everything in English, or hearing the majority in English, is just such an uninspired use of the linguistic freedom that we now have, and it is just so notably refreshing from in 2022 to go back and watch a contest where, and listen, I'm biased because French is one of my languages, and so to me, hearing lots of songs in French feels very refreshing as well, even though at the time French was actually the majority language. France had the best winning record at the time in the contest. Something that has never been the case in my lifetime. I was born in 85. French was still the majority language of Eurovision songs, because of course so many countries in the region have French as one of their languages, and so that there's just that likelihood that French is going to be selected. Luxembourg's no longer in the contest, so that Monaco's no longer in the contest. So those are two countries whose language is French, or who could have opted for French, and who are just no longer in the contest, and so we don't hear French from them anymore because they're just not there anymore. And then of course France and Belgium and Switzerland all have French as one of their languages, and so we used to hear it a lot. And I mean, 2021 was notable because there were 2 very well performing songs in French. Like, it's just two. It used to be like half of the songs were in French. So yeah, it's a bittersweet thing for me to revisit that era in that sense. Oh, I want to tell you about Samira Said, actually, a little bit more, because here's the thing. Obviously, Morocco crashed out of the contest, never to be seen again, which means that we never got any more North African pop icons in the contest. And what we could have had, right? Like, North African pop music is incredible. I just want to say, if you, blessed listener, have listened to Bitakat Hub and thought that is some beautiful, beautiful music, I wish I could hear more of that. Samira Said has her entire discography, or most of it, on Spotify, right? You can look her up. Like I said, Samira Said, not Samira Ben Said, is how you'll find her now. She was recording from the 70s, so there's plenty of stuff. Like, if you love the sound of Morocco's entry in 1980, then go look up her stuff from around the same. She literally released a bunch of music in 81 that's really along similar lines. It's that traditional instrumentation it's pop, but it's classic North African pop. And if you don't mind an early noughts drum machine, then I recommend Yum Wara Yum, which was her 2002 album. And that single particularly, Yum Wara Yum, which is a duet with Cheb Mami, who's an Algerian pop musician, super, super famous in France, super iconic in his own right. That duet is it's one of my favorite singles of all time. If you want to have a real giggle, look it up on YouTube, because the music video is quite something. But yeah, 2002, Yom Wara Yom. Go check that out. I mean, this woman has had such an enduring pop career. Her best-selling album, it's the best-selling Arabic language album globally, as well as in West Asia and North Africa. She didn't release until 2004. Like, hello, the career, okay? And that one is called Awini Big, and it's also great as long as you don't mind a noughties drum machine. I'm just here on my pedestal begging you to go look up Samira Said, because she is a fucking icon and she deserved better. And I mean, perhaps Europe just wasn't ready in 1980 for her greatness.
We just had the wrong countries competing to get those jury points in.
Shout out to Italy, who gave Morocco all its points. I mean, the only points Morocco got were from Italy. So, I should probably retract my Italy slander. I love Italy, okay? Like, generally, as a concept. I just also have a lot of passionate, negative feelings towards elements of its culture.
I can only agree.
I know you can only agree.
Okay, so to save the poor soul who is going to edit this, I think we'll there's so much left to talk about.
Gently start to wrap up, slowly amble towards a close.
Gently. So second to last question is so this was the last time it wasn't hosted by the winning country. Is there anything that the EBU or BBC can take or learn from this specific contest?
I think it's so much has changed, and I think we're already seeing ways in which they are. I think just by the nature of how the contest is organized these days and how much is needed in the lead up, I think they've already, well, I don't know if there's no chaos, because it's Eurovision, there's always chaos. But I think the circumstances in which this is the first time that a country has not been able to host because they are being invaded and cannot, it is not safe. So it's inherently so much different than all of the previous times that a country has had to step in and host for somebody else, because the majority of them were, we had one recently, we don't really want to do it again. I think it has lined up in the fact that the UK came second. I think the BBC would have been in the conversation no matter what the result, just because of the robustness of our global presence, despite what is happening in the UK at the moment. I think that they are doing absolutely the right thing in making sure that the host, I'll call Ukraine the host nation, because this is essentially their contest that is going to be held not in Ukraine, and that has been the rhetoric from all involved, from the EBU to the BBC to UAPBC, and everybody in charge of that. So it is going to be incredibly different from a contest where there wasn't really any indication of national pride, really, in any case, aside from having a Dutch interval act. It was very straightforward. You know, some countries have leaned more into the opportunity to show off a bit of their culture, and the 1980 contest not really wasn't an opportunity to do that, especially because they didn't have postcards. So I think already they're definitely on the right track. I don't know if this is going to be as much of a smaller contest as the Netherlands was in 1980. I don't think having a small budget and having a smaller show is necessarily on the priority list. Definitely maybe a bit of a more subdued show, but I think as far as lessons to learn from 1980, it's hard to say, because that was over 40 years prior and things were just so different, and the circumstances now are so different. So I'd say keep on the track that they're going for. So yeah.
Yeah, I can only agree with a lot of what you said. I think if I hope what we end up seeing in 2023 is that it is basically Ukraine hosting Eurovision. It's just that, produced by BBC is like the logo slapped on it, and we do get like a little bit of whatever city it gets hosted in. That being said, I think there are still some lessons to learn from this. If you do keep the UK elements at a minimum, and especially keep at a minimum the skits and the sketches. Now, I love British humor more than anyone outside of the UK should. I'm a certified Tiaboo, as some people would call it. That being said, keep those sketches and skits and humorous bits. Record them, please do. Let Rylan run loose with his little camera in his little car, but post on YouTube. Have it all posted on YouTube. And as I also said, that is actually where you can really do the British stuff, and that's where I want the Nigella Lawson Food Lab version of the Nikki Look Labs. That's the kind of stuff I want, but I want that on YouTube, and I want the contest either to be just a televised part of it, almost entirely Ukrainian, but with like, hey, if you want to see more British things, here's the YouTube. Also promotes the Eurovision socials, gets more interaction. They can say there were more viewers than ever, etc., etc. And all the English bits, just keep it as they now did in 1980, where just the presenter goes on stage. Okay, I'll just quickly introduce the stuff, and now it's just off, and I'm just standing around for the point bit, because I have to be like, okay, this is like, we're now going to call X country, and that is really all. So in that sense, the subduedness of this contest, not in the sense of there was little budget, because clearly there were some corners cut. We don't need that, but I do like just get this over with part of it, and I do think that is something they can take to the next one.
BBC hire Angus, like, yes, Nigella Lawson Food Lab, absolutely. I fucking love Rylan and his little car segments. They're fantastic. But you're absolutely right. Stick them on social media. That's literally what they're perfect for. I agree. A light touch is no bad thing. Like, that's the kind of main hosting takeaway. That goes for the staging too. I know they reused a lot, but I have grown, I don't know if it's just exposure that's done this, but I've grown strangely fond of the like 1980s Eurovision, 1970s, 80s Eurovision, like almost art deco, like graphic, like mobile staging, set designs. I've grown strangely fond of them. I actually think that the set design was quite beautiful. So simple, really easy to customize or modify, for each song. Like there's enough. It was dynamic despite being so simple. Italy, take note. Like, what can go wrong? It's just some shapes on strings, like just
What
there's
can go
enough.
wrong? It's just a semicircle in the back.
There's so I think there's so much pressure to host the contest to end the spectacle to end all spectacles now. I understand the audiences are huge nowadays. I mean, they were huge back then too. Like I think it was like 400 or 500 million back then. So it's not like they're much bigger now. 100 million is like nothing compared to like within the. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's like they've grown, but they haven't grown like that much. Like it was a huge audience back then too, but just I don't know, there are more moving parts now than there were back then, and on the one hand we're better equipped to cope with them because we've got more technology at our fingertips. There's a lot that's been normalized in broadcasting that back then was still very new, but there is a lot of pressure, isn't there? And oh my goodness, I can only imagine the amount of pressure that the BBC will put itself under, and that we will put the BBC under, given it hasn't hosted Eurovision for so many decades. So it really could be like we could see too many elements, too many ingredients spoiling the broth. And I would love to encourage them to just kind of keep it as simple as possible, keep the touch as light as possible. There's no need, just because it's such a big deal, to like throw everything at it. There just isn't. And I mean, you say that corners were cut. I'm sure that that's true. In 1980, I don't think the contest lost anything for any of those corners being cut, and maybe it's okay to sometimes have years that are incredibly extravagant and to sometimes have years that are like a little more chill. And maybe 2023 will be an extravagant year. Who knows? And maybe, I mean, I thought 2022 was going to be extravagant. I think we all did, because Italy, that's kind of what they do, isn't it, is extravagance. And maybe the lesson is not to try and go over extravagance if you're not absolutely dead certain you can pull it off. They're never going to live that sun down. They're never going to live it down. Did
My
it have
favorite internet rumor is that Italy did the sun so that we all forgot about the 1991 Las
1991?
Vegas pyramid staging.
I mean, that's I love that as a conspiracy theory. Maybe so, but they could have redeemed themselves. They could have just done a flawless show with everything working perfectly, right? That could also have been a good way to go, and clearly that's not quite what happened. And I mean, yeah, the sun not working wasn't the catastrophe that I thought it would be in the end, but it definitely put a dampener on things, didn't it?
Yeah, so I think that pretty much brings us to the end of this podcast conversation, as I wrote it out and as I can put our editors through and our listeners. God knows it's been long enough, so I'll just quickly ask, any final thoughts about 1980 or otherwise? Feel free to share anything you want.
Any final thoughts about anything?
I would say, if you're someone who is maybe newer to Eurovision or maybe doesn't have as much of a connection to the older contests, I would say this is a good contest to check out. I think it's a good combination of some of the charm of an older contest and some very charming entries. I think the aesthetic, the visual aesthetic of the staging possibly may make it look more dull than it actually was. Plus, also, as it's an older contest, less countries participating, voting going relatively quickly, you can go to bed earlier. So that's part of the charm of that. And Stan Papa Penguin.
I love that. I agree. I think that 1980 is a banner year, actually. I think it's a really interesting year too for a lot of reasons, and not least of all because you can see tastes changing. You can see this really heavy influence of chanson still there, partly because there's still so much French language in Eurovision, but even in the German entry and the Dutch entries, like there's this, you can still see that by this point very, very established chanson influence running through. And I'm aware that a lot of young people nowadays don't even know what chanson is, and so I entreat you to go and listen to some Jacques Brel and go look up some chanson française is kind of the the original, but like there are versions in really all across that kind of part of Central Western Europe. And you do hear it a lot in the early contest, and you still hear it in 1980, and I love that. But you're also hearing all of that disco coming in, right? Like that's obviously the popular pop genre of the era, and it's fun to see that interact, because there's a lot of like crossover and fusion moments. You're also starting to see, obviously after ABBA won, you're starting to see groups and more groups, and that just gets more, like the next year afterwards, 1981, which I mean I am not a big fan of 81. I'm actually not a big fan of either of the contests on either side of 1980, but you just start to pick up those trends, and we start to see a lot more groups, which is interesting because I think it was very much a solo or a duet sort of heavy contest up until this point. There's rocky pop starting to come in, right? Again, partly the influence of ABBA and Waterloo. I feel like it's kind of a travesty that we didn't mention the bananas staging of Sweden 1980. Wow, there was some interesting things going on there. There's a lot that's so fun about 1980, both in terms of good things going on and also in terms of utterly baffling things going on. And of course the whimsy that we talked about before. So it's a very engaging contest to watch, and I'd recommend it regardless of what your tastes are, because I think that you'll find something in 1980 that captures you, because it is really sonically quite diverse. And there are a lot of elements of old Eurovision, or last century Eurovision, obviously very much there in 1980. I am not a big fan of the orchestra. Personally, it really distracts me. I actually found it drowned out a number of the acts. But maybe you love the orchestra. A lot of people are big fans of the live music element. So again, if you're a person who like wishes there was more live music at Eurovision, then going back to an older contest is always going to be a good way to kind of get your fix of live music. It is fun. It is fun to see the orchestra there. I just wish it weren't as prominent. I think it's just a little bit, the levels weren't right for me in that particular year. But I think that there's a lot to recommend 1980, regardless of where you're coming from within the fandom, whether you're a kind of a an old Eurovision stan or fairly new to the contest. I think go back, go revisit it, stream Samira Said. Oh, avoid Samira Said's latest stuff. It is not good. I'm so sorry. Just do not. Just swerve and avoid her latest album. 1981 to like 90 and to early to mid noughts. That's the Samira Said like golden era. I'm gonna back away slowly because I could literally keep talking. There's just so much going on in 1980. It's like so culturally dissonant and yet so delightful. And I mean, we barely touched on the fashion. The fashion. Oh my god, the like 70s nightgown like couture, like the 60s like pastel mod stuff, and then like the 80s, the bananas 80s stuff that you start to see really coming in 1981, where it's just like 80s Eurovision visually is bananas. And you start to see that in 1980, I think. Go back, go watch it. That's all.
Yeah, no, quickly about the fashion. I mean, it's also interesting how some artists makes it, how Maggie McNeil has like the 70s beautiful dress, but more hairspray than anyone else in the 80s, and the 80s was the decade of hairspray anyway. Like, she was a fire hazard. I'm sorry to say, but she was a fire hazard on
I
stage.
spent like a whole 5 minutes of our Netherlands episode, which, by the way, if you haven't gone and listened to our Netherlands episode, I think it's a cracker, okay? If you enjoyed this rambling, chaotic energy, very, very passionate, yet rambling and chaotic, you'll love our Netherlands episode. But, like, I spent a good 5 minutes just talking about the fire hazard that was Maggie McNeil's dress in 1980. It is an exquisite garment. It's, like, completely covered in gigantic sequins. Her arms never ever fall to her side, because if they did, they would not, like, she'd be tangled in her dress, you know? It's like wonderful vocal performance, but bloody hell, give the woman like just extra credit for like managing to make it look incredibly organic and natural, that her arms are like elevated to shoulder height for the entire piece, because in order to like maintain the integrity of her garment. What a garment. Just 10 out of 10.
No, yeah, 1980 definitely is a good contest to check out if you want to start checking out older contests. I think there's a lot of musical diversity. It's musically also very strong. I mean, there was some overlap between our top fives, but there was a lot of variety as well. And I don't think, for the most part, we really disagree with any of the songs deserving to be in a top five. We all thought they were pretty good. I mean, the only two clunkers are Italy, as Isabelle has already said, and apparently I have a hate boner for Austria in historical contests because I don't understand how to finish top 10 and they deserve 0 points.
Oh my god, Austria was quite charming to me. How interesting. How interesting. That's
The
another one that I would
2021
not be, like,
audience
one of my
placed it
bottom.
last.
You placed it last?
The 2021 Eurovision Again audience placed it
They
last.
said Austria last? That's so funny.
But yeah, no, I do get that people can find it charming, but at the same time, somehow it just upsets me on some level.
On the set level.
But no, yeah, 1980 is a good contest to check out. Also because on the one hand you have like the iconic Johnny Logan performance that you've already heard 10 billion times, especially if you got into the contest. You know, around time that then 2020 we got like the special and everything where he did What's Another Year. But beyond that, you have the Telex Eurovision, which is a meme onto itself, and Papa Penguin, which is also just a 3-minute long meme, and so many other songs are just iconic performances and iconic songs that you might also have heard elsewhere without knowing. Like me with Katja Epstein, I did not know that was a Eurovision song until like I went through all historic contests last year, and that's when I found out, wait, this wasn't Eurovision. Like that was complete news to me. So yeah, definitely go check out 1980. It's a very interesting contest. It's good that like it's easily forgotten because it didn't mention it, but it is the 25-year anniversary of Eurovision. That was the 25-year anniversary, and it does feel it's good to see that this year 1980 is worthy of being the 25-year anniversary of Eurovision. Like back in the day, Eurovision was still like it was already a long-running thing, but it still definitely wasn't the cultural and television juggernaut that it would become, and it definitely now is, where it truly is like the event. But yeah, that is I think pretty much all there is to say. I think we can all like Isabelle and I will definitely keep on talking about this after we hit. But
with or without baked goods.
Before that, I'll quickly say, don't forget to follow us on all our socials. So that is That Your Site for the website on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. That Your Podcast is not on TikTok, but That Your Podcast is on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Follow our private socials so you can just find us in the Meet the Team parts of Angus, Isabelle, and Helen. I'm very grateful that you two were on here to talk about this fascinating year and to ramble for way too long.
Thank you for hosting, and thank you for being here. Also, Helen.
It's been so much fun. Thank you guys.
Thank you for letting us ramble.
Oh, I just have
We
to
all
edit
say
it.
goodbye.
So yeah,
We'll say-
bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Ah, tot ziens.